The airport was full of noise, people rushing to their gates, suitcases rolling across the floor, and announcements echoing through the speakers. Among the crowd, a calm and elegant black woman walked toward the boarding gate. Her name was Nia. She wore a soft gray coat and carried a simple designer handbag. Her steps were confident but quiet, and her eyes were kind. She walked with grace, the kind that made people turn to look without even knowing why. At gate A17, the boarding for first class had just begun. Nia smiled gently at the agent, scanning the tickets, and handed over her boarding pass. "Good evening," she said politely. The gate agent scanned it and nodded. "First class. You're all set, ma'am." Nia thanked her and walked down the jet bridge, her steps steady. As she entered the plane, she was greeted by a flight attendant. "Hello," Nia said warmly. The flight attendant, a tall woman with sharp features named Claire, looked her up and down. She gave a quick, tight smile. "Hello," she said coldly. Nia nodded and moved to her seat -2A. She placed her bag in the overhead bin and sat down, smoothing her coat neatly. Claire kept watching her. She leaned toward another crew member and whispered, "She doesn't look like she belongs here." The other attendant said nothing. Claire rolled her eyes and walked away. A few minutes later, Claire returned with drinks on a tray. She handed orange juice to the passenger in 1A, water to the man in 2B, then stopped in front of Nia. "Would you like something to drink?" Claire asked. Nia smiled politely. "Water, please." Claire poured the water, but as she leaned in to hand it to Nia, her hand jerked slightly, and the glass tipped forward. Cold water splashed across Nia's lap and jacket. Gasps were heard from nearby passengers. "Oh, you should have been more careful," Claire said sharply. Nia looked down at her wet clothes, her hands frozen. But she didn't shout. She didn't cry. She just looked up and said softly, "It's okay." Claire tossed a few napkins at her. "Next time, pay more attention." A man in the row behind them frowned. A woman across the aisle whispered, "Did she really just blame her?" Nia dabbed the water off her lap quietly. Her face remained calm, but her eyes told a different story, a storm hiding behind silence. Claire walked to the back of the cabin and spoke to another crew member. "She says she's in first class, but I'm telling you, something's off. That ticket must be fake," she whispered. "Claire," she scanned it at the gate. "It was fine," the other crew member said gently. Claire crossed her arms. "I don't trust it. We'll see." Back at her seat, Nia took out a small book from her bag and began to read. Her hands were still slightly shaking, but she didn't let it show. Passengers began whispering. They had noticed how Claire treated her. They had seen the spill. They had heard the rude comment. One young woman in row 3 pulled out her phone and began recording quietly. She didn't know who Nia was, but something felt wrong. She had seen these kinds of things before, just not this close. Claire came back once more, now holding a clipboard. "I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again," she said firmly. Nia looked up, surprised. "Is there a problem?" "Just a routine check," Claire said, though her voice held suspicion. Nia reached into her bag and handed over the boarding pass without a word. Claire looked at it for a long moment, then frowned. I'll have to get this verified." She turned and walked off with it. More whispers spread through the cabin. The man in 2B looked uncomfortable. A flight hadn't even taken off, and something already felt wrong. Nia sat there, calm on the outside, but inside, she was hurt. Not just by the water, not by the eyes watching her now, but by the simple fact that she had done nothing wrong. And yet she was treated like she didn't belong. And she knew why. But she chose silence over shouting, grace over anger. For now, Claire walked down the narrow aisle, holding Nia's boarding pass tightly in her hand. Her heels clicked on the floor, sharp and impatient. Her face was stiff, her mouth tight with judgment. She reached the back galley, where another flight attendant, Maya, stood preparing trays. Claire leaned in, her voice low but full of irritation. "I need you to double-check this boarding pass. I think it's fake." Maya looked confused, but she scanned it at the gate. It said first class, 2A. Everything was fine. Claire didn't listen. "I've been doing this for 10 years, Maya. Trust me, something is off about her." Maya took the pass and scanned it using her small onboard device. A green light blinked. "Claire," she said softly, "it's valid. Name, Nia Hamilton. First class. Nothing's wrong." Claire didn't respond. Her eyes narrowed. "We'll see." Back in seat 2A, Nia sat quietly. She had dried most of the water from her lap, but her clothes were still damp and cold. Her hands were folded over her book, though she wasn't reading anymore. Her mind was racing. Why did she always have to prove herself? Why did her seat, her smile, her calmness make people uncomfortable? She looked out the window, blinking away the sting in her eyes. The captain's voice came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be pushing back shortly. Please ensure your seat belts are fastened." Nia buckled her belt and took a deep breath. Just a few hours. She could handle this. She always had. But the unease in the cabin hadn't gone away. The man next to her, a businessman in a navy blue suit, cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said softly. "I saw what happened earlier. That wasn't right." Nia looked at him and gave a small smile. "Thank you." He looked down, clearly unsure what else to say, but his face showed he meant it. Behind them, a few more passengers whispered to each other. One woman muttered, "She didn't do anything wrong." That flight attendant was way out of line. The woman with the phone had stopped recording, but she hadn't stopped watching. Claire returned to the front with a forced smile. She handed Nia the boarding pass without saying a word. Then she turned to another passenger and asked if they wanted headphones, like nothing had happened. Nia held the ticket gently in her hands. Her name was clearly printed in bold letters. Nia Hamilton, Seat 2A. She tucked it into her coat pocket and turned her eyes back to the window. The plane rolled back from the gate. Engines roared gently as it moved toward the runway. But in Claire's mind, something still didn't sit right. She walked back up the aisle, checking on passengers. When she passed Nia again, she looked down with the same cold stare. Then she whispered, just loud enough for Maya to hear, "Money can't buy class." Maya's eyes widened. "Claire, that's enough." Claire pretended not to hear. High above the ground, the flight reached cruising altitude. The seatbelt signs turned off. The cabin lights dimmed. But tension still floated through the air like fog. Claire brought out the meal cart and began serving first class. She smiled at some, nodded at others, but when she reached Nia, her tone changed again. "We're serving chicken or pasta. Which do you want?" she asked, flatly. "I'll have the chicken, please," Nia replied politely. Claire dropped the tray on the table a little harder than needed. The fork nearly slid off. She walked away without another word. Nia sat straight, her face still calm, but her heart heavy. She had flown first class dozens of times. She had spoken at universities, met world leaders, donated millions to education programs. Yet today, she felt small, not because of who she was, but because of how someone chose to treat her. And yet, she said nothing, because she knew something Claire didn't. The plane cruised smoothly above the clouds, white mist stretching far and wide like an endless sea. Inside the cabin, things looked quiet, but the air still carried an invisible weight. Nia sat in her seat, holding the plastic fork gently. She hadn't touched the food yet. The tray in front of her looked fine, perfectly arranged chicken, rice, and steamed vegetables. But the way it was slammed down earlier stayed in her mind more than the meal itself. She took a breath, steady and deep, and began to eat slowly. Her movements were calm, graceful. She didn't look around or speak. But inside her, thoughts swirled like a storm. Claire stood at the front of the cabin, arms crossed, watching. She thinks she's so special, she whispered to herself. Maya, standing nearby, looked concerned. Claire, why are you so focused on her? She hasn't done anything wrong. Claire rolled her eyes. You really don't see it. Look at her. She acts like she owns the place. Maya lowered her voice. Maybe she does. Claire's laugh was short and sharp. Yeah, right. But Maya wasn't joking. Back in seat 2A, Nia finished her meal, placed the tray neatly on the side, and pulled out her phone. She tapped a few times, sending a message quietly. The screen showed a notification. Your meeting with the board is confirmed. New York office awaits your arrival. Nia smiled softly. No one around her knew what kind of power she held. No one knew that she didn't just ride on jets. She owned pieces of the companies that flew them. Across the aisle, the young woman who had been recording earlier leaned slightly toward her. Excuse me, she whispered. I just wanted to say, I saw how she treated you. That wasn't fair. Nia turned and smiled warmly. Thank you. It's all right. No, it's not, the woman said. People shouldn't be treated like that. Nia nodded gently. Sometimes people treat others badly not because of who they are, but because of what they don't understand. The woman blinked. That's deep. Nia chuckled softly. Life teaches you things. At the front of the plane, Claire was flipping through the passenger manifest, trying to find something, anything, that would make her feel right about what she had done. Then she froze. Her eyes landed on a line that made her heart skip. Passenger name, Nia Hamilton. Status, VIP priority, Platinum Global. Note, Executive Partner, H&C Holdings. Her hands began to shake slightly. H&C Holdings. That name was familiar, too familiar. Claire pulled out her phone and typed it into the search bar. The results appeared instantly. H&C Holdings, a major investment firm, worth billions, known for backing tech startups, green energy, and aviation industries. CEO, Nia Hamilton. Claire's mouth dropped open. She looked up toward seat 2A, her face pale. Oh no. Back in her seat, Nia looked out the window once more. The clouds below seemed soft, peaceful. Her reflection showed faintly in the glass, calm, quiet, powerful. She had learned long ago that real strength doesn't shout. It doesn't fight to be seen. It simply is. People could treat her badly. They could doubt her, spill drinks on her, question her place, but they couldn't take away her truth. And that truth, it was about to come out. Claire walked down the aisle slowly, her face red, her hands cold. Each step felt heavier than the last. She stopped beside Nia's seat. Miss Hamilton, she said, voice trembling. I apologize if I came across as. Nia looked at her, calm and firm. No need, she said softly. Claire blinked. I didn't know. You didn't need to know, Nia replied, her tone gentle, but unshakable. Respect is not something you give only to those with power. It should be for everyone. Claire opened her mouth, but no words came out. Nia returned to her book. The cabin was silent, but the message was loud. The cabin was quiet now. The kind of quiet that comes after something big, even if no one says it out loud. Passengers sipped drinks, watched movies, or stared out the windows, but their minds were not calm. They had seen what happened. They had heard the tone, watched the tray slam down, felt the tension. And now they had learned the truth. Whispers spread quietly. Did you hear who she is? She's the CEO of something big. I feel so bad. She was so polite the whole time. Claire stood frozen near the front galley, her thoughts racing like a storm. How could she have made such a mistake? How had she treated someone like that? Someone important. But deep down, another thought pushed at her, a heavier one. Why did it take learning Nia was powerful for me to regret it? That question stuck to her skin like sweat. In seat 2A, Nia turned another page of her book. Her fingers moved slowly, her eyes calm, but her thoughts were not on the words. She thought about her mother, who had worked 3 jobs just to send her to school. She thought about the first time she was called a liar for wearing a suit too nice for someone like her. She thought about how many times she had been looked at, not as a person, but as a question mark. Even now, all these years later, it still happened. But this time, people saw, people heard, and maybe, just maybe, that would make a difference. Maya, the younger flight attendant, approached her quietly. "Miss Hamilton," she said softly. Nia looked up, her expression gentle. I wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened, and thank you for handling it with such grace." Nia smiled. "Thank you for speaking kindly. That means more than you think." Maya hesitated, then added, "People are watching how we treat each other. All the time." Nia nodded. "Yes, they are." Across the aisle, the woman who had been recording stood up and walked toward Claire. "I have the whole thing on video," she said, not unkindly. "But I haven't shared it." Claire looked up, startled. "What do you want to do with it?" The woman shrugged. "I don't want to ruin your life, but I do want people to understand what bias looks like." Claire's face fell. I didn't mean." "You didn't have to mean it," the woman said. "You just did it. We all saw." And with that, she sat back down. Time passed slowly. The plane was now halfway through its journey. A soft chime rang overhead. The captain spoke again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent in about an hour. We hope you're enjoying your flight." But this flight was more than just a trip across the sky. For Claire, it was a descent into truth. For the passengers, it was a wake-up call. And for Nia, it was just another reminder. Nia stood and walked to the restroom. Heads turned, eyes followed. Not because of how she looked or what she wore, but because they now knew who she was. When she returned, a young girl in economy class reached out shyly. "Are you a boss?" the little girl asked, wide-eyed. Nia smiled warmly. "Yes, I am." The girl's mother looked embarrassed. "Sorry, she saw you in a magazine once. She's always saying she wants to be like you." Nia knelt down to the girl's level. "And you can be. Don't let anyone tell you where you belong. You decide that." The little girl grinned. "Okay." Back in first class, Claire sat down in the jump seat near the galley. Her hands were shaking. For the first time in years, she felt truly ashamed, not because she'd embarrassed herself, but because she had treated someone unfairly based on nothing but assumptions. And now, the whole plane knew. She covered her face with her hands. But Nia remained calm. She didn't need to speak loud. She didn't need to fight. Her dignity had spoken for her. And the lesson was just beginning. The hum of the engines filled the cabin as the plane sailed through the clouds. But inside the first-class section, something had changed. The air was still, almost heavy, like the calm before a storm, or maybe the silence after a truth has landed. Passengers weren't just relaxing anymore. They were thinking, watching, and for once, really seeing. Claire sat stiffly in her jump seat, holding a cup of water she hadn't touched. Her hands trembled slightly. Her face still burned with regret. The moment she saw Nia's name in the system, the moment she realized what she had done, it wouldn't leave her mind. But worse than that, it wasn't just about Nia being a billionaire. It was about all the times before, all the passengers she had judged without knowing them, all the small comments, the fake smiles, the raised eyebrows. How many times had she done this? And no one said anything. How many times had people like Nia stayed silent, just like today? Meanwhile, Nia sat peacefully in her seat. She sipped her tea and looked out the window. But inside, her heart was not quiet. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. But today felt different. Today, People noticed. They didn't just look away. And that meant something. In the row behind her, a man leaned forward and gently tapped her seat. "Excuse me," he said kindly. "I just want to say, you handled all this with more grace than most people ever could. It made me think." Nia smiled at him. "Thank you. That's all I ever hope for. That people start to think." The man nodded slowly. "They will. I promise you. They are." Back in economy class, whispers spread like soft ripples on water. "Did you hear? She's the CEO of a billion-dollar company." "No way. She was treated like that, just because of how she looks." That flight attendant. "She's in trouble." But not everyone was just gossiping. Some people were learning. And that was the true power of the moment. Up front, Maya, the younger flight attendant, stepped into the galley and looked at Claire. "You should say something," she whispered. "People saw everything." Claire looked up with tired eyes. "What can I even say?" "The truth," Maya said. "And maybe an apology." Claire didn't respond right away. Her throat felt dry, her chest tight. Then slowly she stood up. She walked down the aisle with slow, heavy steps. People turned their heads, watching her. She stopped at Nia's seat. Her voice shook. "Miss Hamilton." Nia looked up, her expression calm. Claire swallowed hard. "I want to apologize. Truly. Not because of who you are, but because I was wrong. I judged you. I treated you unfairly. And I'm sorry." Nia didn't speak for a moment. Then she nodded. "I accept your apology," she said gently. "But I hope you remember this the next time, even when the person isn't a CEO." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "I will." She stepped back, her hands shaking. The woman who had recorded earlier glanced at Nia. "You could go viral, you know," she whispered. "People love stories like this." Nia smiled faintly. "They love the ending, not the pain that comes before." The woman blinked, quiet. As the captain announced the final descent, everyone buckled their seatbelts, but their hearts were not the same as when they boarded. They had witnessed something real, something that went beyond money or fame. They had seen dignity in the face of insult. They had seen grace where there could have been rage. And they had learned that power isn't always loud. Sometimes it sits quietly in seat 2A and teaches the sky a lesson it will never forget. The plane began its slow descent, the engines humming softly. Outside the window, clouds floated by like silent witnesses. The city below came into view, glowing under the setting sun. Inside, no one was thinking about the weather or the view. Everyone's attention was still wrapped around what had happened, and the woman in seat 2A. Nia sat calmly, her hands folded on her lap. Her teacup was empty, but her mind was full of thoughts. This flight had started like any other, but it turned into something much bigger. She had experienced disrespect before, many times, in fact. But today, the world saw it. They felt it, and they couldn't pretend it didn't happen. That was the difference. Behind her, a businessman whispered to the woman next to him. She didn't yell, didn't even raise her voice. But I've never felt more called out. The woman nodded. She made everyone think, without even trying. Claire, the flight attendant, sat in the galley with her eyes closed. She could still feel the weight of her own words. "She doesn't belong here." Those 5 words played again and again in her mind. She had said them without even thinking. That's what hurt the most. Maya stood next to her. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Claire didn't answer right away. Then she whispered, "No, but maybe that's good. Maybe I shouldn't be okay with what I did." Maya nodded. "That's the first step." Claire looked at her. "You've been brave through all this." Maya smiled. "I just followed Nia's example." A soft chime rang overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are now preparing for landing. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. The lights dimmed. The cabin fell silent. But the silence wasn't empty. It was full of reflection. As the plane tilted slightly downward, Naya looked out the window. The city lights blinked up at her like stars. She thought of all the girls who had ever been told they didn't belong. She thought of every young black woman who walked into a room and felt watched, doubted, or judged. And she hoped, just a little, that someone on this plane might treat the next woman differently. Just before landing, a young boy walked past her seat with his mother. He stopped and looked at her. "You're really cool," he said shyly. "I want to be like you." Nia smiled. "You can be anything you want. Just never let anyone tell you different." The boy beamed, and his mother whispered a soft thank you before they walked on. The plane landed with a smooth touch, wheels kissing the runway gently. Applause broke out, partly for the pilot, but partly because everyone felt like they'd just finished something big. Like they had all been part of a lesson no one expected. As passengers stood and collected their bags, they glanced at Nia with respect, even admiration. Some nodded, some smiled. No one looked away anymore. Claire stepped forward one last time. "Miss Hamilton," she said quietly, "I will never forget this flight." Nia looked at her. "Then make it mean something." Claire nodded slowly, her eyes damp. "I will." At the exit, the captain stood waiting, as usual, to thank the passengers. When Nia approached, he smiled warmly. "Thank you for flying with us, Miss Hamilton." She paused. "Thank you for keeping us safe in the sky." He gave a respectful nod. "And thank you for keeping our eyes open." Nia walked through the gate into the airport. People moved around her in every direction, rushing to their next destination. But for her, this flight was more than a trip. It was a message. The airport was loud and full of life, but for Nia, everything felt quiet. She walked calmly through the terminal, her steps confident, her face peaceful. But inside her heart, a storm of thoughts moved. She had been disrespected, lied about, humiliated in front of strangers, but she didn't fight back with anger. She fought back with something stronger, grace. And that grace had shaken everyone who saw it. As she reached the arrivals area, a young assistant came running toward her, holding a phone. "Miss Hamilton, the news just came out," the girl said, out of breath. "Someone uploaded the video. It's everywhere. People are talking about what happened on the flight." Nia raised an eyebrow. "And what are they saying?" "They're shocked," the girl said. "Everyone is on your side. Some are angry. Some are inspired. They're calling you a role model." Nia smiled softly. "That's not why I did it." "I know," the girl replied, "but sometimes the quietest actions make the loudest noise." Back on the plane, Claire sat alone. Her shift was over, but she couldn't leave just yet. She opened her phone, saw the videos spreading online, and closed her eyes. Not out of fear, but out of shame. But something inside her had changed. She realized she couldn't erase what she did, but maybe she could use it to grow. She picked up a pen and started writing. A personal apology, a letter to Nia, and a request to speak with the airline training department. "I want to help change this," she wrote. This was her first step toward becoming better. Later that evening, Nia sat in her hotel room, sipping tea. Her phone buzzed with messages. Friends, business partners, even strangers. People thanked her, praised her. Some even cried while writing. But she didn't post anything. She didn't need to. Her silence had already said everything. One message stood out. It was from a mother. "My daughter is 12. She watched that video with me. She asked, 'Why did that lady treat her like that?' Then she said, 'I want to be like the quiet lady. She's strong.'" Nia stared at the message for a long time. Then she closed her eyes. That right there was her reward. Not the fame, not the attention, but that one little girl who saw strength in kindness and power in peace. A few days later, the airline released a public statement. They apologized to Nia. They promised new training for all crew members. They suspended Claire for a short time, but not to punish her. Instead, they asked her to help lead the change. Claire stood in front of a room full of staff and told them the story, not the edited version, but the full truth. "I judged someone because of how she looked," she said, "and I learned the hard way. Dignity has no dress code, and strength has no color." Nia never made a public statement. She never needed to. Her actions were enough. She returned to work, continued running her company, and quietly donated to groups supporting young women of color in business. But on every flight she took after that, people recognized her. And more than that, they respected her, not because she was rich, not because she was powerful, but because she showed the world that grace, even when tested, is still the most powerful force we have. As she boarded another flight weeks later, a different flight attendant smiled warmly at her. "Welcome aboard, Miss Hamilton," she said. "We're honored to have you." Nia smiled back, her voice soft. "I'm just glad to be treated like everyone else." And with that, she took her seat. Quiet, calm, strong, because some people don't need to raise their voice to change the world. Weeks had passed since the flight, but the world hadn't forgotten. The video of Nia's quiet strength had gone beyond the internet. It was shown in schools, in training rooms, even in board meetings. People from all backgrounds watched it and sat in silence afterward, because it wasn't just about a woman in first class. It was about dignity, about respect, about what it means to truly see someone. Nia didn't chase the spotlight. She never did interviews. She never asked for anything. But change followed her. A major airline invited her to speak privately with their leadership team. Not to apologize again, but to learn. She agreed. Not for herself, but for the next woman who might be judged before she speaks. She walked into the boardroom in her calm, confident way. All eyes turned to her, not with doubt, but with quiet admiration. An executive stood and said, "Miss Hamilton, thank you. You've opened our eyes." Nia nodded gently. "You can't change the past, but you can shape the future." Back home, the little girl from that viral message minus 12-year-old Zoe had something special happen too. Her school invited Nia to speak at their yearly empowerment day. Zoe sat in the front row, eyes wide, heart open. Nia stepped on stage, looked around and smiled softly. "I didn't plan to become a symbol," she said. "But if my story helps even one of you feel stronger, then it was worth it." She looked straight at Zoe. "You don't have to be loud to make change. You don't have to fight to be powerful. Sometimes just standing tall is enough." Zoe smiled. She would never forget that moment. Back in the city, Claire had finished her suspension and started something new. She helped develop a new crew training program called Human First. It taught awareness, empathy, and responsibility. And at the end of each training, she would say, "I failed once, but I'm still learning, and I want you to learn before you make the same mistake." Her truth helped others face their blind spots. She wasn't perfect, but she was changing. One night, Nia visited her parents. They were sitting on the porch, rocking slowly as the sun set. Her father looked at her and said, "You've always been strong, Nia. But this time, you didn't just carry yourself, you carried others too." Nia smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I just stayed true to who I was," she whispered.